I stood alone in the courtyard of the small chapel on the outskirts of Maple Ridge. The air was colder than I expected. The wind slipped through my coat, touching my skin as if reminding me that today wasn't an ordinary day. The one lying in that light-colored wooden casket was my husband, Robert Carter. We lived together for more than 50 years. Yet at this final farewell, there was only me. The chairs were arranged in 3 rows. Each one was empty. The funeral staff glanced around, then looked at me with a mix of sympathy and discomfort. He stood by the door, waiting to see if I wanted to wait for anyone else, but I knew no one would come. "Mrs. Helen, should we wait a few more minutes?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. No need. Robert didn't like waiting. He nodded slightly and signaled the pastor to begin. I heard the soft rustle of pages. I heard the wind trembling lightly against the window glass. I heard my own footsteps as I sat down in the front row, the only row with a single person in it. I looked at the casket ahead and felt the absence of everyone else. No son, no daughter, no grandchildren. Just me and the man I had spent most of my life with. While the pastor read the farewell words, I barely heard them. I only looked around and wondered, how did it come to this? Why, even in this final moment, did no one show up? When the service ended, the funeral staff walked over to close the casket. He avoided looking at me for too long, maybe because the silence in the room made him uneasy. I stood up slowly. My knees ached a bit. My hands were cold, but I stayed there until they carried Robert out to the hearse. If you've ever had a lonely moment like this, or simply want to hear more stories about family and the things people rarely say out loud, follow the channel. I'll continue. I drove home in silence. The road from the chapel back to suburban Maple Ridge wasn't long, but it looked farther than usual today. The sky was a pale gray. On both sides of the road, the trees were slowly shedding their leaves as autumn settled in late. I felt like I was returning to a familiar place that suddenly lacked its most crucial part. When I opened the door, the familiar smell of old wood was still there. This was the house Robert and I had lived in for more than 30 years. Everything was exactly where it always was. His slippers beside the armchair were still neatly placed. The glass he used every evening was still sitting in the sink, unwashed. The old radio on the shelf still showed the time off by 1 minute, just as it had every day. Robert always said he would fix it, but then he forgot. I set my bag on the table and stood still for a moment. The house had no voices. I had gotten used to this silence since Robert became seriously ill, but today it felt heavier. I pulled out a chair and sat down, my hand brushing the cold surface of the table. I unlocked my phone, even though I knew I shouldn't do that right now. The screen lit up. The first thing I saw was a post from my son, Lucas. He was standing in a corporate meeting room in Chicago. His shirt was crisp, his tie new. The caption said, "Always busy. When you work hard, opportunities will come." I stared at the photo for a few seconds. I wondered whether today appeared anywhere in Lucas's schedule. I wondered if he remembered that his father had died. I scrolled down. My daughter Marilyn's story appeared. She was lying in a spa. A friend beside her was smiling, holding a glass of fruit juice. Her caption read, "Self-care day. No one can do it for you." I put the phone down. Old memories came back. The day Lucas failed his college entrance exam, Robert stayed up with him all night to comfort him. The day Marilyn moved away for her first job, Robert fixed her old car himself, even though she only said one short sentence. "Dad, make it quick, I have an appointment." Robert always showed up. And today, on his last day, no one showed up for him except me. I stood and walked to Robert's armchair. I touched the armrest where he used to rest his right hand. The surface still had the scratch he always said he would repaint, but never did. The whole house felt like it still held his presence, while I stood here trying to face a truth I wasn't ready to accept. I sat down and took a long breath. Maybe this was only the beginning of what I had to confront. I rose from the chair and walked toward the filing cabinet beside the living room. The wooden door creaked slightly as I opened it. Inside were folders I had kept for many years. Robert always said I was the careful one. I kept everything in order, from insurance papers to old bills. But today, I wasn't looking for Robert's documents. I was looking for what belonged to our children. I pulled out a drawer. A yellow file slipped slightly to the side, labeled Lucas, in the handwriting I had many years ago. I placed it on the table and pulled out another file labeled Marilyn. I sat down and began opening them one by one. Lucas's file was thicker than I remembered. The first page was the receipt for the $18,000 transfer I sent him 4 years ago. At that time, he had just lost his job. I still remember the night Lucas called. It was almost 1 a.m. "Mom, I'm sorry for calling late. I'm in a bit of trouble," Lucas said, his voice trembling. I sat up immediately. "What's wrong, son?" I just got laid off. My savings aren't enough. I'll pay you back, I promise." I didn't think much. I transferred the money the next morning. Lucas thanked me. I believed he would be fine. I turned the page. There was the $9,000 home repair bill from when his roof was damaged by a storm. He only called to say, "Mom, the insurance is taking too long. I need help for now." I did it again. I paused for a moment, then opened Marilyn's file. This one had many small notes. I recognized my hurried handwriting. In the middle was a copy of the $4,500 tuition invoice I had paid when enrolling my grandson, Samuel, in a summer program a few years ago. Marilyn said she was experiencing financial difficulties at the time. I didn't ask much. I flipped further. A note about the day I drove over 2 hours to Marilyn's house, when she divorced her husband. It was pouring rain. Marilyn called in tears. "Mom, I don't know what to do." I only said, "Wait for me, I'm coming." I didn't think about who was right or wrong. I only knew my child needed me. I set the file down and sat still. I didn't blame them. Lucas and Marilyn weren't bad people. They were just living fast-paced, busy lives and perhaps had grown accustomed to me showing up whenever they needed me. They thought I would always be there. They didn't mean to be careless, but familiarity can cause people to overlook what matters. I ran my hand along the edge of the papers. Each sheet marked a moment I stepped in, helped, supported, and stood behind them without asking for anything. I thought about Robert. He was the same. We always stood behind, keeping the family steady. But when you stay behind too long, people forget you're there. I gathered the files and stacked them neatly. I stared at them for a long moment. Part of me wanted to close them and put them away, as I always did. But today, I clearly saw that I had lived my whole life as the silent pillar. And today, at my husband's funeral, I was the only one standing there. Perhaps it was time for me to look at everything again, not to blame, but to understand what I had always avoided. I had given so much, yet never asked myself what I received in return. That night, I didn't turn on the leading light. I only left the bedside lamp on with a soft glow. The dim yellow light made the room quieter than usual. I sat propped against the pillows, the blanket wrapped across my legs. Everything around me was familiar, but the feeling inside was different. I looked to the right side of the bed where Robert used to lie. His pillow was still there. I had left it exactly as it was since he died. I placed my hand on the pillow for a moment. The fabric was cool, without the warmth of a person. I closed my eyes. I thought about Lucas and Marilyn. I wondered if I was being too harsh. Was I doing something too severe? Should I give them another chance? They are my children. I raised them. We shared many beautiful moments. Was I trying to remove them from everything just because they didn't come today? I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling. I remembered Robert's look whenever he wanted me to calm down. He would put his hand on my shoulder and say simply, "Helen, let's just see things as they are." I wondered what he would say if he were still here. Would he agree with me? Would he think I was reacting out of grief? Or would he hold me and tell me not to hope for things that are no longer there? I turned to the small clock on the table. The second hand moved in tiny ticks. I could hear its steady running in the silent room. I felt I had gone too far to turn back, but not far enough to move forward. I lay there for a while, but I couldn't sleep. I turned over several times, then sat up and took a long breath. I knew I couldn't keep thinking like that. Finally, I reached for my phone. I opened my contacts and saw the name Daniel Pierce, lawyer. I did not call right away. I just stared at it for a long moment. Then I set the alarm earlier than usual. I whispered into the room, though no one would hear, "I'll call tomorrow." And I knew my decision had taken shape from that moment. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual. It was still dim outside. I made a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes. There was no Robert's radio, no footsteps of anyone else, just me and the plan I had been thinking about all night. At 9, I drove to Daniel Pierce's office. He'd been our family lawyer for nearly 30 years. Daniel had helped us since Robert opened his small repair shop until we bought this house. He knew our family better than many relatives. His office was in an old building downtown. When I walked in, Daniel was standing and talking with his secretary. He stopped when he saw me and came over to shake my hand. "Helen, I'm so sorry about Robert," he said gently. "He was a good man." I nodded. "Thank you, Daniel." He invited me into the small conference room. Light from the window fell on the wooden table, where a few stacks of papers sat, old versions of our will, I guessed. Daniel sat down across from me. "You called me last night. What would you like to change?" I set my bag down, then spoke plainly. "Daniel, I want to remove Lucas and Marilyn from the will entirely. I want the remaining assets transferred to Samuel." Daniel didn't jot notes right away. He looked at me for a moment. "Helen, this is a big change. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He nodded slightly, as if trying to read my expression. "I need to ask a few more things. Do you understand the consequences? This could anger Lucas and Marilyn. They might come to you and ask why. They might even pressure you." "I know," I answered. My voice did not tremble. "But I've thought it through, not just since last night, but for a long time." Daniel opened the folder. "Legally, it's not complicated. We just need to draft an amendment and a new document. The whole house, the savings, and the remaining insurance proceeds will move into a trust for Samuel. Samuel will gain ownership at age 30, but funds may be used for education or medical care if needed." I nodded. "That's fine. I just want to protect it. Sam is the only one who still visits me without needing anything. He even changed a light bulb for me a few months ago. I trust him." Daniel made a few notes. "Helen, I must ask this again, not to stop you, but to be certain you're not acting out of emotion after the funeral. Do you really want to remove Lucas and Marilyn's names?" I looked down at my hands, fingers interlaced. "Daniel." At my husband's farewell, I stood alone, the only person at the service for the man who raised those 2 children. I don't want to punish them. I want the truth to be clear. They no longer consider family a priority. I cannot go on keeping everything the same, pretending things are fine. Daniel was silent for a few seconds. Then he nodded. "Very well. We will do as you wish." He turned the folder toward me and pointed to where I should sign. "When you sign here, the changes will take effect." I took the pen. My hands were a bit cold but steady. I signed Helen Carter in the handwriting I had used for years. When I set the pen down, I knew I had done something I should have done long ago. Marilyn came to my house the following afternoon. I didn't know who had told her I had changed the will, but from her expression, I guessed she already knew most of it. Her car stopped right in front of the house. The car door closed harder than usual. I heard hurried footsteps on the walkway. I was folding towels in the living room when Marilyn opened the door and walked in without knocking, as had become her habit for many years. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, "I need to talk to you right now." I put the towel down. "All right, sit down." Marilyn didn't sit. She crossed her arms and stood facing me. "Lucas just called. He said you changed the will." "You cut us out. How could you do that?" I looked at my daughter for a moment. Her face was flushed with anger. Her lips were pressed tight. I hadn't seen her like that in a long time. "Marilyn," I said slowly, "you didn't come to your father's funeral." She hesitated half a second, then replied quickly, "I told you. I had a spa appointment earlier. I couldn't cancel. Besides, I thought cousins would come. I thought things were arranged." "This isn't about arrangements," I answered. "This was your father. It was his last day. You didn't show up." Marilyn frowned. "Mom, I know you're upset, but you can't cut us out of everything because of that. We're family, too." I sighed. "You only see me as family when you need something, Marilyn. How many years did I pay for you, help care for Sam, run over whenever you called?" I never once said no. Marilyn turned away for a second, trying to hold herself together. "Mom, who doesn't need help? I help you too." I shook my head. "Not help. You sent bills to me. You asked me for transfers, tuition fees, rent, car repairs. You never came by just to see how I was." Marilyn was silent. Her eyes began to redden, but I knew this kind of crying. Not sorrow, but wounded pride. "You're overreacting," she said, voice trembling though she tried to sound strong. "I'm not the bad person you think I am." "I don't think you're bad," I replied immediately. "You've simply forgotten what matters. Family isn't a place you go to when you need something. Family is being there when others need you." Marilyn opened her mouth to speak, but closed it. Tears began to fall, and she quickly wiped them away as if afraid I would see too clearly. "So you choose Sam," she said in a small voice, "just because he sometimes comes to mow your lawn?" "No," I answered. "I choose the person who is truly present. I choose the person who doesn't treat me like an ATM." Marilyn stood still for a few seconds, then turned her back. "I don't know what to say to you anymore," she whispered. She left, the door opened behind her. Her car started, and I remained in the living room, looking at the towel I hadn't finished folding. I felt neither glad nor relieved. I only acknowledged something I'd long known. Sometimes the truth makes no one happy, but it still needs to be spoken. Lucas came the next day. I saw his car stop in front of the house from the kitchen window. He didn't come alone. Caroline, his new wife, was with him. They stood at the door for a few seconds as if discussing something. Lucas knocked lightly, different from Marilyn yesterday. I opened the door. "Come in." Caroline smiled politely. "Hello, Mrs. Helen. May we come in for a moment?" I nodded, then led them into the living room. Lucas glanced around. His eyes stopped at the sports trophy on the shelf, the trophy he won in the junior high basketball tournament. Robert had been very proud of that. Lucas looked at it a little longer than usual, then turned away. "Mom," Lucas began, his voice softer than I expected. "I heard from Marilyn. Are you changing the will? I wanted to hear it from you." I sat down. Caroline and Lucas sat opposite me. I put my hands on my lap and said plainly, "Yes, I have changed it." Caroline leaned forward slightly, her voice light but clear. "Mrs. Helen, we understand emotions can be stronger than usual after a funeral. This is a difficult time. You may be under pressure. That's okay. But decisions like this should be considered carefully." I looked at Caroline. She was a few years younger than Lucas, neat, always speaking as if prepared for a meeting. "Are you finished?" I asked. Caroline hesitated a little but kept smiling. "Yes, we should discuss it." Lucas put his hand on his wife's and signaled her to stop. He turned to me. "Mom, I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm busy with many things, but I'm still your son. I'm hurt that Dad died. I don't know how to show up at the right time." I looked him straight in the eye. "Lucas, your father's funeral was not a meeting. You don't need a way to show up. You just need to be present." Lucas swallowed. "I know. And I'm sorry I didn't come, but cutting us out of the will is severe. I think you understand my sincere apology." Caroline interrupted. "Yes, this could cause a lot of trouble. Sam is still too young. He doesn't know how to manage assets." I cut her off. "And you two are better? Have you ever asked how I am living? Have you ever visited when you didn't need something?" No one answered. I continued. "Sam is quiet, not demanding. He comes because he wants to. He changed a light bulb, swept the yard, asked if I needed anything. He cares. That is why I chose him." Lucas looked down. His hands clenched into a fist and then relaxed. "I don't know what to say. But I'm disappointed, Mom. I thought you would give us a chance." "I have given you chances for many years, Lucas." He looked up. His eyes were a bit red, but he tried to stay calm. "I understand." Caroline stood up first, her tone a bit cold. Then, "We will not bother you anymore." Lucas rose to follow. Before stepping out the door, he glanced back at the trophy once more, longer than before. I didn't know what he was remembering, but I knew one thing clearly. He had long since drifted away from the values that once mattered to him. They left the house in silence. The door closed softly, but the sound lingered in the empty room. Sam came on Saturday morning. I was sweeping the porch when I heard a motorbike stop at the gate. When I looked up, Sam was standing there with his old backpack, hand raised in greeting. He looked taller than the last time I saw him, his hair a bit messy, his jacket open, his face a little tired but bright. "Grandma," he said softly, "I'm sorry I came without telling you." I set the broom down. "It's okay, come in." Sam stepped up onto the steps and paused, seeming hesitant. I know Grandpa passed away. I really didn't know. Mom didn't tell me. I only heard from a family friend." I studied his face. No excuses, no defenses, just genuine sadness. I nodded. "Your grandfather passed 3 weeks ago." Sam bowed his head. "I'm sorry I didn't come. If I had known, I would have been here." I didn't blame him. Sam had always been the most honest one in the family. "It's not your fault," I said. We sat down on the steps. Sam looked around the yard as if checking everything. "Grandma, the porch is loose. I noticed from the street. If you want, I can fix it next time I come. I know how. I learned that kind of thing in my technical class at school." I chuckled softly. "You came just to fix the porch?" Sam shook his head. "No, I came to see if you were okay. Since I heard, I felt upset. I don't understand how people could leave you alone like that." I didn't answer. I just placed my hand over his. Sam looked down and then sighed. "People say I'm quiet," he continued, "but I've always cherished you, Grandma. I always felt this place. Easier to breathe in. I want to help, even with small things." I went inside for a few minutes. When I returned, I brought a yellow file. The file for Sam. I set it on his lap. "Grandma wants you to keep this," I said. Sam looked at the cover and then looked up. "What is it?" "Your future," I replied simply. "But before you open it, Grandma wants you to remember this. I'm giving this to you not because of money, but because of your kindness. Because you show up when others truly need you." Sam held the file with both hands as if afraid to tear it. "I don't know what to say." "No need to say anything," I answered. "Just keep being yourself." Sam nodded, his eyes a little glassy. He hugged the file to his chest as if making a quiet promise. For the first time in weeks, I felt a little lighter in my chest, not because of what I had done, but because I knew there was at least one person in the family who still understood the value of being there for one another. In the days that followed, the house returned to a familiar rhythm, but it was not the same as before. There were no footsteps of Robert, no voice calling me each morning, but I began to learn how to slow down little by little. In the mornings, I rose early and opened the living room window to let the breeze in. The cold Minnesota air made me shiver, but the feeling kept me awake. I made myself a cup of tea. Robert used to prefer coffee, and I always chose tea. We would sit side by side, each with a cup, listening to his old radio play the morning news. I turned that radio back on. The sound was a bit static, but clear enough to hear. It made the room feel less empty. I let it play through the morning, like a friend in the house. One day, I decided to go into Robert's study. Since he died, I hadn't really cleaned that room. It still carried the scent of old paper and the ink he had used. His desk was left open with files he hadn't finished. Everything made my throat tighten, but I knew I had to do it. I sat in his chair. It was a bit stiff but familiar. I took a cloth and wiped each drawer, every shelf edge, and every picture frame on his desk. I didn't cry as I had in the early days. I felt a strange peace. It felt like talking to him, even if only through the things he had touched. That afternoon, when I reached the bottom drawer, I found some old CDs with songs we used to listen to when we were young. I put one in the small player. The music rose, gentle and straightforward. I stood, placed my hand on the back of the chair, and unconsciously swayed to the rhythm. Then I began to dance. Not gracefully, not fast, just a few slow steps, but my body felt light. My heart felt lighter, too. The next day, Sam came. He brought a bigger toolbox than before. "Today I'll fix the front rail," he said. "Grandma shouldn't be going up and down the steps with the railing loose." I stood on the porch and watched him work. He measured each span, tightened every screw, and tested the solidity with both hands, just like Robert used to. I asked if he wanted some water. He nodded and smiled, a kind, genuine smile. When he took a break, we went into the kitchen to make pancakes. I showed him how to mix the batter so it wouldn't clump, how to keep the pan at the right temperature, and when to flip it so the underside browned evenly. Sam moved slowly but carefully, always asking, "Is this okay, Grandma?" I nodded each time. While we ate, Sam said, "Grandma, I appreciate moments like this more than I thought. I think family starts with small things like this." I looked at him for a while, understanding that when you're young is good. Many adults still don't get it. Sam bowed his head. "I just want you to know, I always value you." I squeezed his hand gently. "I know." We ate in silence for a while, but it was a comfortable silence. Not the distant silence I felt with Lucas or Marilyn. With Sam, you didn't need many words to feel close. In the days after, Sam came more often. He changed bulbs in the hallway, adjusted the back door hinge, and helped me carry boxes to the garage. Not because I asked, he offered. Sometimes he came just for dinner and to listen to my stories about Robert. Slowly. But I could feel myself healing. I did not forget what Lucas and Marilyn had done. However, I did not let bitterness occupy the space meant for peace. I learned one clear thing. Forgiveness isn't so others can keep hurting you. Forgiveness is so that you no longer carry their burden. And during that process, I realized 3 essential truths. Family truly exists when people are present at the right moments. Respecting the elderly is respecting the years they lived for others. And sometimes a small act of kindness can change both lives. On a weekend night, I sat listening to the radio and looked out the window. The first snow of the season began to fall lightly. I felt I had stepped into a new phase, not forgetting, but moving forward. I knew Robert would smile if he could see me now, and I smiled too, for the first time in many months. 2 days later, Caroline came to my house. Lucas did not come with her. The weather was cold, the wind strong, yet she still stood outside the door for a moment before ringing the bell, as if gathering courage. When I opened the door, she held a small bag, not an expensive gift, just a box of homemade cookies. "I'm not here to ask for anything," Caroline said as soon as I invited her in. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard from her. "I just want to talk." I sat in the armchair. She sat across from me. I waited. Caroline placed the cookie box on the table. "I'm sorry I didn't come to Robert's funeral. Back then, I thought work was more important. Now that I think about it, I was wrong." I stayed silent. She continued, "I know Lucas is upset, but mostly because he's ashamed. He doesn't want to admit he missed the most important moment." I listened but didn't respond. Caroline looked down at her hands, turning her wedding ring. "I understand you had your reasons for changing the will," she said. I'm not here to convince you to change your mind. I just want you to know there are things I regret, not because of the money, but because of the distance between everyone." I nodded slightly. "Thank you for being honest." That was all I said. Caroline stood, bowed her head politely, and left the house. No drama, no arguments, a short conversation, but enough to settle some of the things that had been hanging in the air. That afternoon, Sam finished fixing the front railing. He leaned against it, checking it one last time. "It's solid now, Grandma," he said, a smile spreading across his face. I stood beside him, didn't say much, just placed my hand on his shoulder. Simple things like that made the house feel brighter. Later in the day, I received an envelope from Daniel, the lawyer. Inside was the confirmation that all documents were complete. The new will had taken effect. Everything was transferred exactly as I wished. That evening, I sat at my desk and wrote a few lines to myself. "Helen, from today on, the road ahead is no longer pulled back by things you cannot change. You have chosen peace, and you deserve it." I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer. Outside the window, the first snow of the season fell gently, white and silent. I watched each flake. My chest no longer felt heavy. I knew I had made the right choice. And if anyone is reading these words, I want to say something simple. Start choosing what brings you peace, even when it's hard. It's always the right step. Looking back at everything that happened, I came to understand something I had never dared to face before. Family is not built by words alone, but by showing up at the right moments, not by gifts, not by rushed photographs, but by being present when someone truly needs you. It took me many years to realize that dedication matters more than promises. A promise not carried out is nothing more than an empty sound. But a small action, a genuine moment of care, can change an entire chapter of someone's life. Respecting the elderly is not an obligation. It is how we respect our own future. Everyone will grow old someday and will need a comforting hand, a phone call, or simply someone willing to sit and listen. I used to be the one always standing behind, taking care of the whole family. Now I choose to take care of the rest of my own life, and that choice is the right one. If this story makes you think about your family or brings back something you once overlooked, hold on to it. You don't have to say it out loud right away. Just remember that love doesn't grow on its own. It needs presence to survive. And if you want to hear more true stories like this, follow the channel. It gives me the strength to keep sharing the things so many people keep in their hearts.